With over half of enterprise security budgets going towards detection and response in 2020, the challenge is investing in solutions that can scale, migrate, and adapt with your business. Cloud-native security solutions from ExtraHop are purpose-built to help your team respond to threats across the hybrid attack surface. Everywhere your enterprise exists today and wherever it goes tomorrow, ExtraHop is there to secure it. Learn more at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadoorian and Jason Albuquerque. Join us at InfoSec World 2020, March 30th to April 1st, 2020, at the Disney Contemporary Resort. Security Weekly listeners save 15% off the InfoSec World Main Conference or World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2020 and click the register button to register with our discount code. Also, our next webcast is January 15th with Cecilia Marnier, RSA Conference Program Director, Innovation and Scholars, where we will discuss RSA Security, RSA Conference Sandbox, RSA Conference Innovation Sandbox, Launchpad, Security Scholar, and their how-to seminar for innovators and entrepreneurs. Register for our upcoming webcast by visiting securityweekly.com. Select the webcast drop-down from the top menu and click registration. All right, let's cover some articles for this week. One thing I do is I avoid all resolutions and like technology trends.
Agreed.
Typically. The number of like emails and webcast announcements I get, like, get the 2020 technology trends report, or, you know, how do you do your New Year's resolutions?
Yeah.
I don't have a New Year's resolution. Paul and I sit down, we hammer out a set of goals for the company, we put some objectives around it, and we go.
It's the way to do it.
Yep.
But I did think there was an interesting discussion around leadership trends, which is not technology trends. And so the first article I put in here is 5 CIO and IT leadership trends for 2020. And the reason I pulled this in, Jason, is, you know, a lot of this overlaps into the CISO as well.
Yes.
And so I think it's really important to talk about some of this, because CISOs will see some of these same leadership trends themselves when you look at what's going to happen in 2020.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, you know, some of the items that I pulled out, there were 5 technology leadership trends that they pulled out, and a couple of them that I pulled out that were really meaningful for me. Current state, right? Budgets are increasing, but the business demands value realization. Huge, right? Huge where I'm at. You want investment, you have to show me the ROI. You have to show me how this is going to add value to the business, right? And the other one is projects morphing into products. There's no such thing as a transactional project anymore in my world. Everything's about continuous improvement. Everything's about just getting better, right? And keeping that portfolio of projects open, right? And you're talking about phases now. Now, you know, we're not just doing a set it and forget it project. They're just continuous all the time.
It's interesting. One of the things, you know, we talk a lot about is problem-solution value. And I want to emphasize value because you just hit on this point, is if I'm a CISO or a CIO or any IT leader and I have a problem, I'm going to go out to the industry and I'm going to look for a set of solutions. And I want something that's going to solve the problem, but also provide me value in solving that problem. And I think a lot of people forget about the value component of the solution. And here it's been highlighted as, look, you're going to get more budget, but you better show me value at the end.
And it's not just immediate value, it's long-term value, right? It's not going out there finding a solution for instant gratification to solve a problem in the moment. It's about, you know, taking that solution and showing how it adds value over time. Because a huge issue that even our clients are dealing with is just adoption rates. Because they do that. They go out, they find a solution, they find a technology, they spend the money on the blinky light, they put it in, they get about 20% adoption for the money they're spending. Well, that's not value, right? And more we're being challenged as executives. When you spend this money, show me what that adoption rate's going to be. Show me the value that's going to provide me over the next couple of years, right? Because again, it's reoccurring costs. We're gonna buy the technology, but we're gonna have to pay maintenance on it for however many years. We're gonna have to have folks invested in supporting it, right? So it's getting that long-term value add and being able to have that conversation with the CEO, with the board, and show them the long-term value it's going to bring.
And how long will that technology be relevant too?
Right. So a lot of times what I end up doing.
Shrinking though.
Right. So a lot of times what I do, and I say this a lot to my team as well, don't talk about the technology or the brand, talk about the service it's providing to the organization. Mm-hmm. And I look at it in I call it the Lego, right? At any point in time, I should be able to pop out that yellow Lego and put in a green Lego in its place, and the business should still go. Right? So talk about the service being provided, not the manufacturer or the product or the blinky light. Talk about the service.
That's a change that's been like 50 years in the making, right? Mm-hmm. Like in prep for our security history segment.
Yeah.
I mean, if you develop an app like way back in the day, you had like a mainframe and you developed in a language and you wrote a program. That program could run for 20 years, right? And then you look at...
we just talked about utilities, 30 years.
Industrial control systems, right? Is the same thing. When we look at business solutions... I mean, it's exactly what Jason's talking about, right? It's got to solve the problem. It's got to show value. But the whole thing are pieces and components. Like, how much lifetime does that have, and how easily or difficult is it going to be when I look into my crystal ball and go, we're going to need to pop that out and pop something else in?
Yep.
Exactly. And that's why, always understanding where the technology is going, so you understand where the business is going. What do your business goals align to? What does that mean from a set of projects and eventually products, Jason, is this article pointed out, and making those right decisions so you get longevity out of those solutions that you're buying as well. Because if you're going to go from on-prem to cloud, then that has an impact into the longevity of the value a solution is going to provide to you. So these are all things that have to be factored into decisions.
Yeah. Well, one of the big ones that maybe really take a step back and think too is that there's trouble ahead was one of the bullet points, right? So a recession's predicted to come in 2020 or 2021. But the good piece that came out of it is that at least technology is going to be a foundation to keep the businesses afloat, right? Because how many businesses don't leverage technology to run today? Not many, right? So at least knowing that technology is kind of going to be a cornerstone to get us through is great. But as leaders, we need to be very smart with where we're investing, how we're spending money, how we're hiring, because we have to prep. If there is a recession being predicted, we need to be prepared for that.
Yep, agreed. Next article is on some of the leadership books that are coming out in 2020. Yeah. I think Jason, you identified this article. It was interesting, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, it's all about what's going to be next on my book list, right? To read or audiobooks, and I typically like to go out there and see what's projected to be top of sale for the next year. And there are a couple that stood out to me, right? Think outside the building. The description is how advanced leaders can change the world one smart innovation at a time. It's got the author as a leading business thinker, and they really want to take today's culture and transition that into a leadership strategy, right? So how do you take the rapid technology growth that's going on today, the social aspects of what's going on in technology, environmental problems, and really put it all together, because everything's so complex these days, and create a leadership strategy going into 2020 and beyond, right? Really the next decade, right? So how do you build that new leadership strategy? And then the other one that stood out to me on this one is Future Leader. 9 skills and mindsets to succeed in the next decade. So for me, it's really 2020. It means the next decade for me. How am I fine-tuning and sharpening my leadership skills for this next decade coming up?
Yeah, the Future Leader one was definitely the one of most interest on my plate to take a look at. Just knowing that we're going to go through another series of changes over this next decade. What are some of those leadership skills you're going to need to kind of manage through that next decade? So that's the one that intrigued my interest the most.
Yeah. How about you, Paul? Anything? I know you're a big reader. What's on your list for the year?
The ones that were in yours. I did add some books to Audible, and I don't remember what they are now, to be honest with you.
So I think Jocko's coming out with a new book.
Is he?
Yeah, one's going to drop at the end of this month, I think.
As it should.
So I already have that on. I have it on my waiting list.
Mine's kind of a mixture of like history, science fiction, and leadership. And maybe on future shows, I did add a bunch of books on Audible. I don't remember what they are.
Right.
But I did add some, yeah.
So yeah, I mean those are two that stood out.
I didn't recognize any of the books in that list, which is probably a good thing. I need to.
Well, for me, that's why I grabbed it, right? Because I didn't recognize the authors and I didn't recognize the book. So for me, that's like, all right, I like to get out of my comfort zone and try new authors, try reading. The only one I really knew was Maxwell. I've read quite a few of Maxwell's books, right? But
I like to let others read all those books and then recommend
then
the
let
ones
you know
that are
it's good or
the
bad.
I mean, Santa Arcangelo was great at that, right? Because those are the
Right.
ones that we recommend,
Yep.
are used by organizations, including our own,
Yep.
that you have all your employees read and all of your customers read
Right.
and things like that. So.
These next two articles actually tied together. So the first one is replace resolutions with habits and make your life mean something beyond 2020. The second one is the HBR podcast interview with James Clear, who is actually referenced in the first article on the right way to form new habits. So these two articles actually synchronized together. You can actually listen to the podcast, about 26 minutes long, and it kind of ties these two articles together. But again, I'm not a big resolution guy.
No.
I don't do New Year's resolutions, right?
Right.
But I do look at ways to improve better habits as part of my daily life, because to me, it's those habits that are going to help me succeed in whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish. Now, in the podcast version with James, he talks about two types of goal or habits. He talks about energy habits, right? So think about diet, exercise, all that. He said that's an energy habit, and that's a whole bucket of things that you can work on. Then he talks about a second bucket, which is attention habits, things to improve your day-to-day attention and growth and leadership, and the list goes on and on and on. I thought it was a very interesting way to break down the different types of habits to focus on.
Yeah, no, and one of the things that he had put in the podcast too was, and this is for both sides of the aisle, good habits take a long time, right? It's not this is why resolutions don't work. You don't get instant gratification, right? It's gonna take time to actually see success. Bad habits equals instant gratification. Right? You're going to McDonald's and eating that food because it's quick, it's easy to do. Right? So these good habits are hard to do. They're say easy, do hard.
I like that what Matt talked about is we not just in the turn of the year, right? But we're constantly setting goals for ourselves, goals for the company, often aligning those between the two. And let's be frank, you have personal goals, you have career goals, right?
Yep.
And when, Matt and I are trying to run the company, we have goals that have to align for the company. What I like is if you spend time defining those goals, which is hard, right? And Matt, you even took my document, and I had mixed up goals and objectives, and it's very easy to do, right? Matt very concisely pared that down, made some great modifications. Then once you have those goals and objectives, both for your career and maybe personally, then look at developing the habits. I think the other reason why resolutions don't work is you're like, oh, that sounds really cool, like something that I want to do. Right, and it's not just not aligned with your goal. So if you align them to, where you want to be in your career, where you want to be in your personal goals, whatever those may be, and then develop habits that allow you to achieve those objectives and subsequent goals.
Yeah, I mean these two articles reminded me of a book I read a couple of years ago, and really, the book is more about execution and how to execute well. But it's called The 4 Disciplines of Execution, right? And it's by Chris McChesney and Sean Covey. And it was a really great book because what it did was it said, number one, like in this article, kind of focus down a little bit, right? Scale down your goals into things that are achievable, right? And then from there, create the habit. And one of them is having a weekly cadence about, how you're making progress on these different goals that you want to achieve. That builds the habit, right? And it's quick. It's like a 15-minute almost like a scrum session, right?
Yeah.
15-minute scrum session where you're saying, here's what I said I was going to do last week. Here's exactly what I achieved. It forces the accountability there. And here's what I'm going to do next week to grow towards this goal, right? So it creates that habit and it creates the accountability you need to be checking yourself because
before you wreck yourself.
Before you wreck yourself, right? Because you're in with a team of folks who are going to hold you accountable to moving forward on the goal.
Yeah, I think you have to work backwards from goals down to habits. I liked the 2-minute rule, right? So if my overarching goal is we have to produce more technical segments, right? One of those maybe is writing some more code. Then I was looking at React. React has become very popular. We're going to use it here. I want to start familiarizing myself with it. Maybe my 2-minute rule is I spend 2 minutes every day reading some kind of snippet or article, right, about React. So all of that ties together. You're building a new habit, helping you achieve your objectives, which is ultimately helping your goals.
One of the things I think I'm going to try here too is it says stack new habits on current ones. So piggyback an existing habit, something that you do on a daily basis, right, or a weekly basis. Piggyback it, because now you're starting to bring that new habit into something that you're already doing and into your cycle and your calendar already.
Right.
I think that's a great idea. So that's something I may try. And the other one is
wake up every day, get on the treadmill, but what you're listening to is piggybacking on that habit of getting up every day.
Right?
And getting
Instead
on the
of listening to music, maybe I'm listening to an Audible book. Maybe I'm listening to a leadership book. Maybe I'm listening a podcast, something like that. The other one too is identity-based habits. I love this. Be what you want to be, right? Become that. Make your identity. You want to become a CISO, handle yourself like a CISO, right? On a daily basis, become that identity, right? And that's going to help you towards those good habits.
What I think is interesting is the document, Paul, that you started, and I kind of scaled down our goals to 3 goals. I'm a guy of 3,
by the way.
right?
Yep, love it.
And for each goal, we had 3 objectives. So again, you got to just kind of pare it down and bring it down. But if you think about what those goals do for us as a business for a second, it's our identity. It's who we, Security Weekly, wants to be to our audience, right? We want to bring more technical content. We want to reach more people with our content. We want to continue to engage that community. Our goals are focused a lot around who we want to be, identity-based goals, not outcome-based goals, which is kind of, Jason, what you were just talking about.
Yeah, it's a great point.
But you pare them down, right? And so we did this instinctively before we even read these articles for the show. We naturally, that's kind of what you and I did for Security Weekly.
Right. And a lot of it for me is like, it breeds anxiety in me if we don't have that, right? Because then I feel like we're just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks, right? I'm like, I know there's things that we want to accomplish. Like, let's break it down exactly the way Matt just articulated.
Everybody needs their compass or their North Star, right? You need to know.
Exactly.
I mean, it's the Simon Sinek. Why are we doing this?
Right.
It's the why. Start with the why.
Right.
Exactly. And Paul is the best salad shooter out there. I mean, he's got ideas that stick all over the place.
Matt's
what I have to do is kind of reel it back in and focus it.
I earned that nickname a while ago,
salad
too.
Shooter.
So, yeah. I sent you another salad shooter email today. I'm like, I think all this stuff is missing from our process documentation. It was just it was actually 9 things. And I'm like, these should just put, a lot of that stems, too, from when we talk about habits and being part of a successful organization and or group within your organization. For me, a lot of it comes down to those little things that you may not think about. A lot of it comes from the Belichick style of mentality, right? It was really the email I sent you today was we got to account for all these little tiny things that maybe by themselves don't seem very significant, right? But if we can develop good habits around them, we can all be conscious of them, and they help us work towards that goal of serving the community even better than we did previously, right? They're all important things for us to work on. So I think a lot of times in groups and organizations, we get too focused on the bigger things and not all those small little minute details. And when we look at these great leaders, like let's take Apple as an example. When they were designing the first Apple computer, Jobs wasn't a programmer, wasn't a brilliant programmer, but he understood the market and he knew that to accomplish his goal, every detail had to be right. I mean, the shade of color of the computer, the way it was designed, where the keyboard was laid out, all of these, how the plastic was made. He was involved in all those decisions. And when you see Apple come out with this great product, it's because there's someone now in Jobs' absence taking over all like those minute little details, right? Driving people nuts with all those little details, but all of it is feeding into the goal, so we can't lose sight of those.
But to your point, all of those little things can become big noise added up, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it'll take you away from marching toward the goal if all of these little things pop up as issues.
That's why you learn to delegate.
Right.
And luckily, 6 or 7 on the list are things that are instinctively we know where they go.
Yeah.
There's probably 2 or 3 we're like, oh, we haven't thought about that. We better make sure our documents are updated.
That's why I have the
those.
salad shooter, right? Yeah,
I know.
70%. Like, no, we got about 30%. Oh, we gotta, exactly.
Exactly. I got 2 more articles. Next one is how to handle speaking in public when you're not a public speaker. Again, some tips and tricks. We've reviewed pieces of this. It's a pretty good article, pulling it together in a really easy way to comprehend. Yes, you're going to be nervous. Look, as many times as I've walked on stage, I still get nervous every time I walk up there. It's just part of it.
Part of being a human.
Well, and you know what I like too is that there's always something to learn about public speaking, I think, and improve upon. And one of the things I was showing Jason before the show was a tweet, and it says, if you're one of those public speakers that say good morning, oh, come on, now we can do better than that. Good morning. I automatically do not like you from that moment on, right? So I think that there may be some tips and or habits that we've picked up along the way as presenters to do things such as overcome nerves, relate to our audience, that are kind of overdone, and maybe some things need to be rethought when you give your presentations. Because I'm guilty of doing this sometimes in my presentations, but now to hear that feedback, I'm like, yeah, probably not the greatest thing.
It's played out.
Yeah, it's played out or just not effective, right?
Right. And that's why I like the number 2, start with a story. Instead of saying, hello, my name is Matt Alderman, I'm here to talk to you about blah, blah, blah. Start with a story. Start with a very interesting intro to your presentation that gets their attention, right? When you go through speaker training, one of the things you learn is you've got 30 seconds basically to capture the attention of the human for them to pay attention to you for the rest. And if you waste the time saying, good morning, my name is, I'm going to talk about blah, 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 you just wasted 10 to 15 seconds of that 30-second catch. And so if you start with a story that's interesting, ties into your discussion, it attracts their attention right away, and that allows you to move into your presentation in a very unique way.
Yeah, I mean, stories are key, right? I mean, it's one of those things that if you want to draw in the audience right away, starting with a good story is always gonna bring them in, right? They're gonna be forced to pay attention at that point, right? So, it's something that folks have always taught me. When even in a presentation, right? I mean, even if it's a presentation to executive leadership, typically I'll open up with something short, short story, kind of get their juices flowing, get them thinking and paying attention and looking at me instead of looking at their laptops, right? Because, half the time when you're in an executive meeting, people are still trying to do their job while they're in the meeting. So try to do something to kind of get their eyes to come up and look.
In that sense, Jason, I think it adds a sense of realism, right?
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily have to be directly related to your topic, but I mean, let's say you're presenting on the latest threats. If you start off by talking about a real story about ransomware that happened to a company from the personal aspect of the company that succumbed to that attack, right? Start with that story. That helps, I think, add an element of realism that a lot of times our presentation topics are pretty abstract, pretty technical, right?
Yeah.
But bringing that down to, hey, there was like actual people that were involved in this ransomware attack, and talk about either side of it.
Right. And
then when you start talking about threats and you're mentioning ransomware, they can make those.
They relate it back.
Yeah, I think it's that realism that's important too.
Yeah, I like number 4 because when I go to do keynotes, this is one that it says practice your ass off, and I do. Right. Some people last year on Twitter asked me, what is the one recommendation? I'm like, practice, practice, practice. Like I will literally, before a big presentation, I will record myself no less than 6 times, usually 6 to 8, and I'm rehearsing my talk track and then listening back to it and making tweaks. So that practice actually helps you when you're up on stage of knowing exactly the points you want to get across so that you don't forget something, you don't need to look at your notes, and it comes out just more natural. That practice is so important.
That's one place that I struggle, right? I'm usually someone who kind of waits till the last minute, and I'm still reading the presentation on the way there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The morning of, it's tough, right? So.
But I think a good thing too is, to that end, is we should practice with each other, right? Because I think that there's no greater way to practice than to present to your peers. So I would recommend, because I find it weird to practice, with just me in the room.
And that's my struggle, right? That's my struggle, is to practice by myself.
So what I do is I'll often try and align it so that if I am presenting locally, that's a presentation that I'm going to give somewhere else, and I'll maybe then do a dry run before that with some peers. So I think we can do a better job in 2020 of giving. If you're going to do a presentation, let us know, and we can
That'd be awesome.
have a private meeting.
Yeah,
and it's just us, and you give your presentation.
Yeah.
Right?
I appreciate that. Same.
There you go. Yeah. Last article is, I thought this was an interesting one, right? Interview tips for your career. I thought this was good to gauge the culture of a company, right? If we think about look, at the end of the day, all of us humans, want to provide value. We want to have a purpose. We want to find the right company. How do you gauge whether this is the right company for you? This gives you 5 questions to ask. They're pretty benign when you read them, right? But the answers to these could give you a lot of insight about the company and the culture of the company to help you make a decision. Is this the best place for me?
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, and again, they don't have to be asked verbatim, but take the topic, right? I mean, the topic of how does someone within the organization give feedback back to the organization, right? If they have some type of a model or process for that where, feedback is taken in a good light, right? And they want to get better at it. Career paths and roadmaps, right? If the HR person or the manager struggles to talk about how they develop career paths for their employees, that's a red flag, right?
Yeah, I thought the one around goals for the company for this year and for the next 5 years, how well is that communication handed down? How well do people know what the goals for not only this year, but 5 years in the future look like? It's an interesting question to see how well who you're interviewing with understands kind of the strategy of the company. I thought that was really interesting.
Yep.
My favorite one was your favorite workplace tradition, right? Back to the Amazon story, you build your own desk, right? What's that tradition for this company? Are there traditions that people get engaged with that show how people work together and kind of have fun?
Yeah, and that's the key. I mean, through that question, you can gauge how serious, the culture is, or how much they can kind of let loose a little bit, right?
It's interesting. The more I go through, creating a company and running the company and seeing others do the same and reading all these articles about culture in other companies, just how important. It's like the most important thing, especially in a leadership
100%.
position. It was an article I think we covered last year that really stuck with me. That was like, your role as an executive is really to reinforce the culture, right? I mean, that's really like your primary mission. And that's hard. And I find it's also one of the more challenging things too.
I mean, so many organizations, and you're seeing it a lot these days, about being, customer success obsessed. My company as well, right? We want to make sure that we're focused on the success of our clients. But in order to do that, in order for that to be successful, you have to be employee success obsessed as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they're the ones delivering the service to the client. And if you're not obsessed with the folks delivering the service, those folks aren't going to be obsessed with the service they're delivering.
So, Paul, I think you do a great job. I think the big concern for everybody last year was I going to change the culture? Right? Put the pressure on me for a year, right? I mean, if you think about the transition we went through last year as a business, right? Of the way we wanted to continue to bring our culture out, right? I think it's easier when you're in studio like you are to do that on a more regular basis. One of the big challenges I had last year was convincing people I wasn't going to ruin the Security Weekly culture and that we were going to embrace that and continue that forward. I mean, we've made a lot of conscious decisions to continue to strive and make sure that happens. The last question is, how often do you do stuff outside of work? Every time I'm in studio, right? I mean, as often as we can, because that's another piece of that culture with the employees to bring that all the way through. You want to be able to have those engagements outside of work, continue to build those relationships. Something we did a pretty good job with last year, but it's challenging as a remote executive to do that too.
It's challenging in general to sometimes even just define what your culture is, to be able to do things that reinforce it.
Right.
That's one of my struggles, right? Matt talks about the culture here. Like, I don't know, sometimes I find it difficult to put my finger on sometimes, right? Maybe that's one of my goals for 2020.
There you go.
I always describe it this way. I get to talk to who I want, when I want, about what I want. I love it, right? And we get to smoke and drink while we do it. So, hey.
With no pants. I mean.
Hey now.
This desk serves multiple purposes.
Oh, goodness. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me for this session. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.